Ron Bradley's voice breaks when he tells you about that morning, 27 years later, and he still checks his phone first thing when he wakes up, hoping for a call that might bring his daughter home. His wife, Eva, does the same thing. They've been waiting for that phone call since March 24th, 1998, the day their world collapsed in the middle of the Caribbean Sea. Amy Lynn Bradley was supposed to be having the time of her life. A 23-year-old college graduate with bright green eyes and an infectious smile, she had just finished her degree at Longwood University in Virginia. This Caribbean cruise was meant to be a celebration, a family vacation with her parents and younger brother Brad before she started her adult life in earnest. The Rhapsody of the Seas was a floating paradise, carrying over 2,000 passengers through crystal clear waters toward exotic destinations most people only dream about. The Bradley family had been looking forward to this trip for months. Ron worked hard to provide these kinds of experiences for his children, and Eva had been planning every detail. Amy was particularly excited about the cruise. She loved to dance, loved meeting new people, and the idea of visiting multiple Caribbean islands in 1 week thrilled her. Her brother Brad, just 21 and full of energy himself, was the perfect companion for late-night adventures aboard the massive vessel. When they boarded the Rhapsody of the Seas in San Juan, Puerto Rico, on March 21, 1998, everything felt perfect. The ship was magnificent, stretching over 900 feet long with multiple decks of restaurants, bars, entertainment venues, and pools. Amy quickly fell in love with the atmosphere. She and Brad spent their first evening exploring every corner of the ship, making friends with other passengers and crew members, and dancing until the early hours at the ship's disco. The first few days passed like a dream. The family visited Aruba together, soaking up the sun on pristine beaches and exploring local markets. Amy was in her element, her natural friendliness making her popular among both passengers and crew. She had a way of lighting up any room she entered, and people were drawn to her genuine warmth and easy laughter. The cruise director even noticed her enthusiasm and energy during the ship's activities. But it was the ship's nightlife that really captured Amy's heart. Each evening, she and Brad would make their way to the disco, where a live band called Blue Orchid performed. The band was made up of several crew members, including a man named Alistair Douglas, who went by the name Yellow. He was the bass player, a charismatic performer who seemed to command attention wherever he went. Amy found herself drawn to the music and the electric atmosphere of the late-night entertainment. By March 23rd, their third night aboard the ship, Amy had established a routine. She would spend the day with her family, enjoying meals and activities together, then spend her evenings dancing and socializing. Her parents didn't mind. Amy was an adult, responsible, and level-headed, and they trusted her judgment completely. Besides, she was always with Brad or other passengers they had met, and the ship felt completely safe. That final evening started like any other. The family had dinner together, talking and laughing about their adventures in Aruba and their excitement about reaching Curaçao the next morning. Amy was particularly animated, telling her parents about the people she had met and the fun she was having with the ship's entertainment. After dinner, she and Brad headed to the disco as usual, while Ron and Eva retired to their cabin to rest. The disco was packed that night. Blue Orchid was performing, and the dance floor was crowded with passengers moving to the rhythm of Caribbean-influenced music. Amy danced with several people, including some of the crew members. She seemed to be having the time of her life, her green eyes sparkling under the colorful lights of the club. Several witnesses would later remember seeing her that evening, describing her as happy, energetic, and completely herself. As the night wore on, the crowd began to thin out. Amy and Brad stayed later than usual, not wanting the evening to end. They danced, talked with friends they had made during the cruise, and enjoyed the music until well past 3 in the morning. Finally, around 3:30 a.m. on March 24th, they decided it was time to head back to their cabin. The walk back to their room was routine. They took the elevator up to their deck, said goodnight to each other in the hallway, and went to their respective cabins. Brad shared a room with his parents, while Amy had her own cabin nearby. It was the last normal moment their family would ever share. What happened next would haunt the Bradley family forever. Around 5:30 a.m., Ron Bradley woke up early, as he often did. He decided to step out onto the small balcony attached to their cabin to get some fresh air and maybe catch the sunrise. As he stepped outside, he was surprised to see Amy sitting in a chair on the balcony, looking out at the ocean. She was fully dressed in the same clothes she had worn to the disco, and she appeared to be awake and alert. Ron didn't think much of it at first. Amy had always been a bit of a night owl, and it wasn't unusual for her to be up early after a late night. He assumed she had simply come out to enjoy the peaceful morning and watch the sunrise. The ship was approaching the Dutch island of Curaçao, and the view was spectacular. Ron said good morning to his daughter, and she responded normally, seeming perfectly fine. He went back inside to let her enjoy the quiet moment alone. That was the last time anyone in the Bradley family saw Amy alive. When Ron woke up again around 6 a.m., he decided to check on Amy before the family headed to breakfast. He went to her cabin and knocked on the door, but there was no answer. He knocked again, louder this time, but still nothing. Growing concerned, he went to find a crew member who could help him access the room. When they opened the door, Amy's cabin was empty. The bed didn't appear to have been slept in. Her belongings were still there, including her identification, money, and all of her personal items. Most importantly, her shoes were in the room. Amy was barefoot when she disappeared, wearing only the clothes she had worn to the disco the night before, a white blouse and blue jeans. Ron immediately began searching the ship, checking every public area he could access. He went to the disco, the restaurants, the pools, anywhere Amy might have gone. Eva and Brad joined the search, growing more frantic by the minute. They asked other passengers if they had seen Amy, describing her distinctive green eyes and friendly demeanor. Some people remembered seeing her the night before, but no one had seen her since she left the disco with Brad. The family alerted the ship's security, but the response was not what they had hoped for. The crew seemed reluctant to take immediate action, suggesting that Amy might have simply gone to another part of the ship or was sleeping somewhere else. They implied that young passengers sometimes spent the night in other people's cabins, but the Bradleys knew this wasn't like Amy. She would never disappear without telling them, especially knowing they would be docking in Curaçao that morning. As the hours passed, the Bradleys' desperation grew. The ship was scheduled to dock in Curaçao at 8 a.m., and they realized that if Amy had somehow left the ship, either voluntarily or against her will, they might never find her. They begged the ship's captain to delay departure from Curaçao, but he refused, citing schedule requirements and the needs of the other passengers. By the time the Rhapsody of the Seas reached Curaçao, Amy had been missing for several hours. The local authorities were notified, but the language barrier and unfamiliarity with the situation made communication difficult. The Bradley family felt helpless as they watched the ship prepare to dock, knowing that every minute that passed made finding Amy more difficult. When the ship finally docked, Ron and Iva made a desperate decision. They decided to stay in Curaçao to search for Amy, while Brad remained on the ship to continue looking there and to serve as a point of contact in case Amy was found aboard the vessel. It was an agonizing choice, splitting up the family when they needed to be together most, but they felt they had no alternative. As passengers began disembarking for their day on the island, the Bradleys scanned every face, hoping against hope to see Amy among the crowd. They approached the ship's crew members who were helping with the disembarkation, asking if anyone had seen their daughter. Most had no information, but their questions revealed something troubling about the ship's handling of the situation. It became clear that the ship's crew had not conducted a thorough search of the vessel. No announcement had been made to the passengers about Amy's disappearance. No systematic room-by-room search had been initiated. The crew's response seemed inadequate given the gravity of the situation, and this would later become a source of tremendous frustration and anger for the Bradley family. Meanwhile, as the family searched desperately, several witness accounts began to emerge that would change everything they thought they knew about Amy's disappearance. The first came from a local taxi driver who approached the family shortly after. They arrived in Curaçao. He claimed he had seen a young woman matching Amy's description early that morning, around the time the ship was docking. The taxi driver's story was both hopeful and terrifying. He said he had seen a barefoot young woman with long brown hair running through the parking area near the cruise ship terminal. She appeared to be frantically searching for something, possibly a telephone. When he approached her and asked if she needed help, she seemed frightened and ran away. He described her eyes as distinctively green, matching Amy's most memorable feature. This sighting gave the Bradley family their first real hope that Amy might still be alive. But it also raised horrifying questions. Why would she be running barefoot through a parking lot in a foreign country? Why would she seem frightened? And most importantly, where was she now? The family immediately shared this information with local law enforcement and the FBI agents, who were beginning to get involved in the case. A search of the area where the taxi driver claimed to have seen Amy was conducted, but no trace of her was found. However, this sighting would prove to be just the beginning of a series of alleged encounters with Amy that would span years and multiple countries. As the Rhapsody of the Seas prepared to depart Curaçao later that day, the Bradley family faced an impossible decision. Ron and Iva had to choose whether to continue their search on the island or return to the ship where Brad was waiting. The ship's schedule couldn't be delayed any longer, and if they stayed in Curaçao, they would be separated from their son and their only connection to the ship where Amy had disappeared. Ultimately, they decided to return to the ship, hoping that Amy might have been found aboard the vessel, or that staying with the ship would give them access to more information about what had happened to their daughter. It was a decision they would second-guess for years to come, always wondering if they should have stayed on the island to continue the search. The remainder of the cruise was a nightmare for the Bradley family. While other passengers enjoyed the sun and tropical destinations, the Bradleys spent every moment searching, questioning, and pleading for help. They made friends with other passengers who joined their search efforts, and they pressured the crew to take more aggressive action to find Amy. But as each day passed without any sign of Amy, the horrible reality began to set in. Their daughter, sister, and the light of their family had vanished without a trace. The joyful family vacation had become every parent's worst nightmare, and they were thousands of miles from home with no answers and no clear path forward. When the ship finally returned to San Juan on March 27th, the Bradley family faced the devastating task of returning home without Amy. They had to pack her belongings, answer endless questions from investigators, and somehow begin to process what had happened to their family. The bags that had been packed with such excitement just a week earlier now felt like tragic reminders of a life interrupted. The FBI opened an investigation immediately, classifying Amy's disappearance as a potential kidnapping. This designation was significant because it allowed federal agents to pursue the case across international boundaries and coordinate with foreign law enforcement agencies. Agent Brad Garrett, who would become deeply involved in the case, later described it as one of the most complex and frustrating investigations of his career. Back in Virginia, the Bradley family's friends and community rallied around them. Search efforts were organized, flyers were printed, and a reward fund was established. Amy's disappearance quickly gained national media attention, appearing on television programs and in newspapers across the country. The family did interview after interview, always hoping that someone, somewhere, might have information that could lead them to Amy. But media attention brought both hope and additional heartache. While the coverage helped spread awareness of Amy's case, it also attracted attention from people who claimed to have seen her, often in places and circumstances that seemed impossible or inconsistent with other evidence. Each potential sighting had to be investigated, raising and then crushing the family's hopes repeatedly. The investigation revealed several disturbing aspects of Amy's disappearance that hadn't been apparent initially. Investigators learned that the ship's crew had not immediately secured Amy's cabin or treated it as a crime scene. Potential evidence may have been disturbed or lost in the hours after she was first reported missing. The ship's security cameras, which might have provided crucial evidence about Amy's movements that morning, were either not functioning properly or the footage was not preserved. More troubling were the accounts that emerged about Amy's interactions with certain crew members, particularly the members of the Blue Orchid Band. Several witnesses reported seeing Amy talking and dancing with band members throughout the cruise, and some suggested that these interactions had become increasingly personal. However, the crew members themselves provided conflicting accounts of their contacts with Amy, and some seemed evasive when questioned by investigators. The most concerning revelation came from passengers who reported seeing Amy in the company of crew members after she had supposedly returned to her cabin for the night. These witnesses claimed they had seen Amy with members of the Blue Orchid Band in areas of the ship that were typically off-limits to passengers, and at times that conflicted with the timeline established by her family. One particular crew member, Alistair Douglas, became a focus of intense scrutiny. Known as Yellow, he was the bass player for Blue Orchid and had been seen talking with Amy on multiple occasions during the cruise. Passengers reported that Amy seemed particularly friendly with him, and some suggested that their interactions had become flirtatious or romantic in nature. When investigators attempted to interview Douglas and other crew members, they encountered a frustrating lack of cooperation. Some crew members left the ship when it returned to port, making them difficult to locate for questioning. Others provided alibis that were difficult to verify or gave statements that seemed rehearsed or incomplete. The cruise line's handling of the situation also came under intense criticism from the Bradley family and law enforcement. Royal Caribbean International was accused of prioritizing their schedule and reputation over a thorough search for Amy. The family felt that crucial time had been lost in the first hours after Amy's disappearance, when immediate action might have made a difference in finding her. Legal battles would eventually emerge between the Bradley family and the cruise line, with the family alleging that the ship's crew had been negligent in their response to Amy's disappearance and may have even been complicit in covering up what happened to her. These allegations would take years to resolve and would add another layer of pain and frustration to the family's ordeal. Meanwhile, the sightings continued. In the months following Amy's disappearance, people claimed to have seen her throughout the Caribbean. Some sightings described her as appearing to be held against her will, while others suggested she was living freely but seemed different somehow, perhaps drugged or coerced. Each report was investigated, but none led to finding Amy or provided definitive proof that she was still alive. The most significant early sighting came in August 1998, just a few months after Amy's disappearance. American tourists visiting a beach in Curaçao reported seeing a young woman who matched Amy's description. According to their account, the woman appeared distressed and was with several men who seemed to be controlling her movements. When the tourists tried to approach her, the men quickly moved her away from the area. This sighting was particularly credible because the witnesses were able to provide detailed descriptions that matched Amy's physical characteristics, including her distinctive green eyes and several tattoos she had gotten in college. The tourists had no apparent reason to fabricate the story, and their account was consistent with the theory that Amy had been kidnapped and was being held against her will somewhere in the Caribbean. FBI agents traveled to Curaçao to investigate this sighting, but by the time they arrived, there was no trace of Amy or the men who had allegedly been with her. Local law enforcement was cooperative, but had limited resources to dedicate to the search. The investigators returned to the United States with more questions than answers, but with a growing conviction that Amy was likely still alive and being held somewhere in the region. As 1998 came to an end, the Bradley family faced their first Christmas without Amy. The holiday that had always been a time of joy and togetherness became a painful reminder of their loss. They left Amy's stocking hung by the fireplace and set a place for her at the dinner table, maintaining hope that she would somehow find her way home. Ron and Eva Bradley had become different people in the month since Amy's disappearance. Ron, who had always been strong and protective, now felt helpless in the face of a situation he couldn't fix. Eva, who had been the organizing force of their family, struggled to maintain hope while dealing with the crushing weight of not knowing what had happened to her daughter. Brad, barely out of his teens, was dealing with survivor's guilt and the knowledge that he had been the last family member to see Amy alive. The investigation continued into 1999, but leads were becoming scarcer and less credible. The FBI maintained their involvement in the case, but with limited new evidence, progress was slow. The Bradley family hired private investigators and continued their own search efforts, but the trail seemed to be growing colder with each passing month. Then, in early 1999, something happened that would reignite hope and bring new energy to the search for Amy Lynn Bradley. A witness came forward with a story that was both encouraging and deeply disturbing, a story that suggested Amy was not only still alive, but was being held in circumstances that were almost too horrible to imagine. This new information would lead the investigation in an entirely different direction and open up possibilities that the Bradley family had never considered. It would also introduce them to a world of human trafficking and exploitation that they never knew existed, a world where young women could disappear without a trace and be forced into lives of unimaginable suffering. The witness claimed to have seen Amy in a situation that was both hopeful, because it suggested she was alive, and terrifying, because it indicated she was in grave danger. This sighting would change everything about how the Bradley family and law enforcement approached the case, and it would set in motion a series of events that continue to this day. But before we explore this new development, it's important to understand just how much the Bradley family's life had changed in the year since Amy's disappearance. They had gone from being a typical American family enjoying a vacation together to becoming amateur investigators, media spokespeople, and advocates for missing persons cases everywhere. Ron Bradley had taken leave from his job to focus entirely on finding Amy. He spent his days making phone calls to law enforcement agencies, following up on tips, and coordinating with private investigators. Every lead, no matter how remote or unlikely, was pursued with the desperate hope that it might bring Amy home. Eva Bradley had become the family's liaison with the media and the public. She gave interviews, appeared on television programs, and spoke at events for families of missing persons. Her strength and dignity in the face of unimaginable pain inspired many people, but those close to her could see the toll it was taking. She had lost weight, developed health problems related to stress, and struggled with periods of deep depression. Brad Bradley, now 22 years old, was trying to rebuild his life while carrying the weight of that final evening with his sister. He replayed every moment of their last night together, wondering if there was something he should have noticed, something he could have done differently. He struggled with college, relationships, and simply moving forward when part of his family was missing. The entire family had learned to live with a kind of suspended grief. They couldn't properly mourn Amy because they didn't know if she was dead. They couldn't move on with their lives because she might still need them. They existed in a limbo of hope and despair that was emotionally and physically exhausting. Their home in Virginia had been transformed into a makeshift command center. for the search. The walls were covered with maps of the Caribbean, photographs of Amy, and timelines of her disappearance. Boxes of tips and leads filled spare rooms. The telephone rang constantly with calls from reporters, investigators, and people claiming to have information about Amy. Friends and family members had rallied around the Bradleys, but relationships had become strained under the pressure. Some people didn't know how to act around the family anymore, uncertain whether to mention Amy or pretend everything was normal. Others had grown tired of the constant focus on the search and wished the family could find a way to move forward. The financial cost of the search was also mounting. Private investigators were expensive, and travel to follow up on leads was costly. The family had spent their savings and borrowed money to continue their efforts. Well-meaning friends had organized fundraisers, and strangers had sent donations, but the expenses seemed endless. Despite all of these challenges, the Bradley family never considered giving up. Their love for Amy and their need to know what had happened to her drove them to continue searching, no matter how hopeless it sometimes seemed. They had made a commitment to their daughter and sister that they would never stop looking for her, and they intended to keep that promise no matter what it cost them. As they entered 1999, they had no way of knowing that they were about to receive information that would change their understanding of Amy's disappearance completely. The new witness account would introduce possibilities that were both encouraging and horrifying, and it would set them on a path that would consume their lives for decades to come. The story this witness would tell was almost impossible to believe, but it came from someone with no apparent motive to lie. It suggested that Amy was alive, but trapped in a situation so terrible that it challenged everything the family thought they knew about their daughter's fate. This new information would bring fresh hope to the search, but it would also introduce new fears and force the family to confront possibilities they had never imagined. In January 1999, nearly 10 months after Amy's disappearance, U.S. Navy Petty Officer William Hefner claimed to have encountered a woman claiming to be Amy Bradley at a brothel in Curacao. Hefner described being seated in the bar area when a Caucasian woman approached him, identifying herself as Amy Bradley and pleading for assistance. Hefner's account was detailed and specific, but it came with complications that made it difficult to verify immediately. Hefner reached out to Bradley's family in May 2002, explaining that he initially refrained from reporting the incident due to concerns for his military career related to his presence in a brothel. He expressed conviction that the woman he encountered was indeed Amy Bradley. The delay in reporting troubled investigators, but Hefner's story contained details that hadn't been made public, details that seemed to validate his claim. According to Hefner, he had been at the establishment with friends when a young woman approached their table. She appeared distressed and nervous, constantly looking over her shoulder as if she feared being watched. When she spoke to him, she whispered urgently that her name was Amy Bradley and that she was from Virginia. She begged him to help her, saying she was being held against her will and couldn't leave. Hefner described the woman as having distinctive tattoos that matched Amy's, including a Tasmanian devil cartoon character on her shoulder and Chinese symbols on her lower back. These details had been shared with law enforcement, but weren't widely known to the public. The woman also had green eyes, Amy's most memorable feature, and long brown hair similar to what Amy had when she disappeared. But before Hefner could respond or ask more questions, the woman was approached by two men who seemed to be watching her. They spoke to her in what sounded like threatening tones, and she immediately became more frightened. The men escorted her away from Hefner's table, and despite his desire to help, he felt intimidated by the situation and uncertain about what he should do. When the FBI investigated Hefner's claims years later, they faced significant challenges. The FBI subsequently investigated these claims. However, they discovered that the brothel had burned down and no substantive evidence was found to support Hefner's assertions. The convenient destruction of the location made it impossible to verify Hefner's story or conduct a thorough investigation of the site. However, Hefner's account introduced a theory that would dominate the investigation for years to come, the possibility that Amy had been kidnapped and forced into human trafficking. This theory explained many of the puzzling aspects of her disappearance, including why she might be seen in various Caribbean locations, but always seemed to be with men who appeared to be controlling her movements. The human trafficking theory was both hopeful and horrifying for the Bradley family. On one hand, it suggested that Amy was still alive, which meant there was still a chance she could be rescued and returned home. On the other hand, it meant she had been living a nightmare for years, subjected to unimaginable suffering and exploitation. The new millennium began. The Bradley family threw themselves into learning everything they could about human trafficking in the Caribbean. They discovered a dark world of exploitation that tourists rarely see, where young women from around the world are trapped and forced into prostitution. The Caribbean's location between South America and North America, combined with its busy cruise ship and tourist traffic, made it an ideal region for trafficking operations. Ron and Eva Bradley began working with organizations that combat human trafficking, hoping to find connections that might lead them to Amy. They learned about the tactics used by traffickers to control their victims, including drugs, threats, violence, and psychological manipulation. They discovered that victims often become so traumatized and controlled that they're unable to escape even when opportunities arise. This knowledge was both educational and heartbreaking. Every piece of information they learned about trafficking made them imagine what Amy might be experiencing, and the mental images were almost unbearable. But they couldn't stop learning because understanding this world might be the key to finding their daughter. The family also began receiving more reports of sightings that seemed to fit the trafficking theory. In 2000, tourists in Jamaica reported seeing a young woman who looked like Amy at a resort. The woman appeared to be with several men who seemed to be controlling her behavior. When tourists tried to approach her, the men quickly moved her away from the area. Similar reports came from other Caribbean islands. Witnesses described seeing a woman who matched Amy's description, always in the company of men who seemed to be handlers or guards. In each case, the woman appeared distressed or fearful, and attempts by tourists to make contact were blocked by the men with her. The pattern of these sightings was consistent with what experts told the family about how trafficking victims are, moved around to avoid detection. Traffickers typically don't keep victims in one location for long periods, instead moving them frequently to prevent them from establishing relationships or becoming familiar enough with an area to escape. But not all the information the family received was legitimate. In the fall of 1999, Bradley's parents received an email from a man named Frank Jones. Jones would become both a source of hope and tremendous pain for the Bradley family, representing the dark side of desperate people's willingness to believe. Anyone who claims they can help. Jones proclaimed himself to be a former U.S. Army Special Forces officer working with a team of ex-Army Rangers and ex-Navy SEALs who specialized in rescuing kidnapped Americans from foreign countries. He claimed to have located Amy and to know exactly where she was being held. His story was elaborate and convincing, filled with military jargon and detailed descriptions of supposed rescue operations. Jones told the family that Amy was being held on a small island in the Caribbean, controlled by a trafficking ring with connections to organized crime. He said she was alive but being moved frequently to avoid detection. He claimed his team had been conducting surveillance and had confirmed her location, but needed funding to execute a rescue mission. For the Bradley family, Jones represented everything they had been hoping for. Here was someone with supposed military expertise who claimed he could bring Amy home. His communications were professional and detailed, and he seemed to have inside knowledge about trafficking operations in the Caribbean. Over several years, Jones extracted hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Bradley family, always claiming that more money was needed for equipment, bribes, or operational expenses. Amy Bradley's brother has spoken out about a $200,000 scammer who was left out of the Netflix documentary about Amy's Royal Caribbean cruise disappearance. The family mortgaged their home, borrowed money from relatives, and exhausted their savings to fund what they believed were rescue operations. Jones provided regular updates describing close calls and near misses that explained why Amy hadn't been rescued yet. He sent photographs that he claimed showed Amy, though the images were always too blurry or distant to provide definitive identification. He created elaborate stories about corrupt officials who needed to be bribed and rival criminal groups that were interfering with the rescue efforts. The psychological manipulation was sophisticated and cruel. Jones understood exactly how to play on the family's desperation and hope, always providing just enough encouragement to keep them invested while creating believable excuses for why the rescue attempts kept failing. He portrayed himself as Amy's only chance for survival, making the family feel that abandoning his efforts would mean abandoning their daughter. For years, the Bradley family lived in a state of constant anticipation, expecting at any moment to receive a call from Jones saying that Amy had been rescued. They planned for her return, maintaining her room exactly as she had left it, and preparing for the medical and psychological care she would need after years of trauma. But gradually, inconsistencies in Jones's stories began to emerge. Dates didn't match up, locations he described didn't exist, and promised results never materialized. When the family began asking harder questions and demanding more concrete evidence, Jones became evasive and eventually disappeared completely, leaving the family devastated and financially ruined. The revelation that Jones was a con artist was almost as traumatic as Amy's original disappearance. The family had to confront not only the fact that they had been deceived, but also that they were no closer to finding Amy than they had been years earlier. The false hope that Jones had provided made the reality of their situation even more crushing. But even as they recovered from the Jones deception, new sightings continued to emerge. In 2005, Judy Moorer says she was using a restroom in Barbados when she heard a bunch of people come into the bathroom. A group of men were ambushing a woman and telling her a deal was imminent and that she better be on time. When Moorer left the stall, she saw an emotional woman by the sink. The Amy Bradley Missing website says, Amy was seen in Bridgetown, Barbados on March 1, 2005. The witness encountered Amy in the bathroom of a Broad Street department store, but Amy was actually seen 3 times that day. Amy was seen with 4 handlers. They were initially seen standing together in the store, with the woman appearing uncomfortable and constantly supervised. According to Moorer's account, when she emerged from the bathroom stall, she encountered a young woman who was clearly distressed. The woman was crying and appeared frightened. When Moorer asked if she was okay, the woman whispered that her name was Amy and that she was from Virginia. Before any further conversation could take place, several men entered the bathroom and quickly escorted the woman away. This sighting was particularly significant because it occurred in broad daylight in a public location, and the witness had no prior knowledge of Amy's case. Moorer provided detailed descriptions that matched Amy's physical characteristics, and her account of the woman's behavior was consistent with what experts knew about trafficking victims. The same year brought another development that would shock the Bradley family and provide what seemed to be the strongest evidence yet that Amy was still alive. A major breakthrough in the theory that she had been trafficked, however, came back in 2005 when Bradley's family revealed that she had been found on a sex worker's website. The photos had been sent into their tip line by email and showed a woman that looks like Amy half-naked. Amy Bradley's family received an email lead in 2005 in which a photo of a woman named Jess was posted on an adult website. The person posting the lead identified himself as a Navy officer and believed the woman resembled Amy Bradley in some way. The photographs were deeply disturbing, but contained details that seemed to confirm they showed Amy. The woman in the images had tattoos in the same locations as Amy's, though they appeared to have been altered or partially covered. The facial features, body type, and overall appearance strongly resembled Amy, though the woman appeared older and showed signs of the hard life she had been living. The family sent the photograph to authorities and to forensic experts who specialized in image analysis. While the quality of the photographs made definitive identification difficult, several experts concluded that the woman in the images could very well be Amy Bradley. The website where the photographs appeared specialized in escort services throughout the Caribbean, exactly the type of operation where trafficking victims might be exploited. The photos were removed from the site shortly after they were discovered, suggesting that someone realized they had attracted unwanted attention. For the Bradley family, these photographs represented both their worst fears and their greatest hopes. The images suggested that Amy was alive, but confirmed that she was being exploited in the most horrible ways imaginable. The knowledge that their daughter might be trapped in such circumstances was almost unbearable, but it also meant that rescue was still theoretically possible. The FBI and other law enforcement agencies intensified their efforts to track down the source of the photographs and identify the woman in them. Investigators worked with international agencies and organizations that combat human trafficking to try to locate the specific operation where the photos might have been taken. But despite extensive investigations, the trail went cold. The website operators couldn't be located, the photographs couldn't be traced to their source, and no further evidence emerged to confirm whether the woman in the images was actually Amy Bradley. As the years passed, the Bradley family continued to receive occasional reports of sightings, but they had become more cautious about which leads to pursue. The experience with Frank Jones had taught them that desperate people are vulnerable to manipulation, and they had learned to approach new information with healthy skepticism while still maintaining hope. The family's approach to the search had evolved significantly since those first frantic days after Amy's disappearance. They had become experts on human trafficking, missing persons investigations, and the various scams that target families of missing people. They worked with law enforcement agencies, consulted with experts, and connected with other families dealing with similar situations. Ron Bradley had become a different person over the years of searching for Amy. The confident, protective father had been worn down by years of false leads, financial struggles, and emotional trauma. His health had suffered from the chronic stress, and he had aged far beyond his years. But his determination to find Amy remained unshaken. Eva Bradley had channeled her grief into advocacy, working with organizations that support families of missing persons and raise awareness about human trafficking. She spoke at conferences, appeared on television programs, and worked tirelessly to keep Amy's case in the public eye. Her strength and dignity inspired many people, but those closest to her could see the toll that years of uncertainty had taken. Brad Bradley, now in his 30s, had struggled to build a normal life while carrying the weight of his sister's disappearance. He had finished college, started a career, and even gotten married, but Amy's absence was a constant presence in his life. He participated in search efforts and media interviews, but the survivor's guilt and the weight of being the last person to see Amy alive never fully left him. The entire Bradley family had learned to live with ambiguous loss, a type of grief that occurs when someone is missing rather than confirmed dead. Unlike traditional grief, which has a clear beginning and eventual resolution, ambiguous loss never ends. The family couldn't properly mourn Amy because she might still be alive, but they couldn't move forward with their lives because she was still missing. Their home remained a shrine to Amy and the search for her. Photographs covered the walls, maps marked potential locations, and boxes of tips and leads filled every spare room. The telephone still rang regularly with calls from reporters, investigators, and people claiming to have information. The family's entire existence revolved around the possibility that today might be the day they learned what happened to Amy. Friends and extended family members had learned to navigate the complicated dynamics of supporting people dealing with ambiguous loss. Some relationships had been strained to the breaking point, with people who wanted the family to move on, or who grew tired of the constant focus on Amy's disappearance. Others had become closer, understanding that supporting the Bradleys meant accepting that the search for Amy would always be part of their lives. The financial cost of the search had been devastating. Beyond the money lost to Frank Jones, the family had spent tens of thousands of dollars on private investigators, travel to follow up on leads, and various search efforts. Well-meaning friends had organized fundraisers, and strangers had sent donations, but the expenses were ongoing and substantial. The emotional cost had been even higher. Years of living in crisis mode had taken a tremendous toll on the family's mental and physical health. All three family members had struggled with depression, anxiety, and various stress-related health problems. They had sought counseling and therapy, but the fundamental source of their pain remained unresolved. Despite all of these challenges, the Bradley family never seriously considered giving up the search. Their love for Amy and their need to know what happened to her drove them to continue, no matter how hopeless it sometimes seemed. They had made a commitment to Amy that they would never stop looking for her, and they intended to keep that promise regardless of the personal cost. As the 20th anniversary of Amy's disappearance approached in 2018, the family reflected on 2 decades of searching, hoping, and grieving. They had survived false leads, financial ruin, and the constant emotional roller coaster of potential sightings that led nowhere. They had learned more about human trafficking, international crime, and missing persons investigations than they ever wanted to know, but they had also discovered reserves of strength they never knew they possessed. They had found purpose in their pain, using their experience to help other families and raise awareness about issues they had never known existed. They had maintained their love and support for each other through circumstances that destroy many families. Most importantly, they had never lost hope that Amy might still be alive somewhere, waiting for rescue or looking for a way to come home. Every day that passed without definitive proof of Amy's death was another day that rescue remained possible. Every advancement in communication technology, every new tool available to law enforcement, and every increase in public awareness about human trafficking represented new opportunities to find Amy. The case had gained renewed attention in recent years as documentaries, podcasts, and television programs explored Amy's disappearance. Each new production brought fresh attention to the case and generated new tips and leads. While most of these leads didn't pan out, the family remained grateful for any opportunity to reach new audiences who might have information about Amy. The unknown Bradley family story had become more than just a missing persons case. It had become a testament to the power of parental love, the strength of the human spirit, and the importance of never giving up hope. Their unwavering dedication to finding Amy had inspired countless other families dealing with similar situations and had helped raise awareness about human trafficking and the exploitation of vulnerable people. But beyond all the advocacy, media attention, and public awareness, the Bradley family's motivation remained fundamentally personal and simple. They wanted their daughter, sister, and the light of their family to come home. They wanted to hold her, tell her they loved her, and begin the long process of healing from the trauma she had endured. As Ron Bradley often says when people ask him about the search, he checks his phone every morning, hoping for the call that will bring Amy home. After more than 25 years of waiting, that hope might seem unrealistic to outsiders. But for a father who loves his daughter, for a mother who refuses to give up on her child, and for a brother who carries the weight of that final evening. Together, hope is not a choice. Hope is a necessity, the only thing that makes it possible to get up each morning and continue the search for the person who remains the missing piece of their family's heart. The phone calls still come. The tips still arrive. The sightings are still reported and investigated, and somewhere in the Caribbean, in a world of exploitation and darkness that most people never see, there might still be a woman with green eyes who remembers her name. Is Amy Lynn Bradley and dreams of the day she can finally come home.